I don't know what you've inherited lately, but I just got handed a key to a house no one in my family wants to talk about. That should have been my first red flag. The WEXLER estate, tucked into a green cradle of overgrown kudzu and fog-heavy woods, is 3 hours from anything with Wi-Fi. The legal papers called it a compound. The locals call it the throat. They say you only go down the throat once. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I'm doing here. Also, drop your location and what time you're listening, because I want to know who's out there watching the same shadows I saw. Now, turn off the lights, maybe turn on the fan for some soothing noise, and let's get started tonight. The drive-in was beautiful in that moss and murder sort of way. Every road twisted like it forgot its own name halfway through. I passed a mailbox made of stacked bird skulls. Probably a joke. Hopefully a joke. Anyway, the house is bigger than you'd expect. 3 floors, colonial shutters, vines gripping every brick like it owed them rent. The kind of place where every window looks like it's watching you. The lawyer told me, all you have to do is spend one night and sign the paperwork. Simple. Until I noticed something weird. 12 bedrooms. That's what the floor plan says. That's what the blueprints confirm. That's what everyone in the family kept repeating at the reading of the will. It's a 12-bedroom house. So why did I count 13 doors upstairs? One of them, far end of the 3rd floor, has no doorknob. Just a dented brass plate where one should be. It's flush with the wall, and if you blink too long, you'll miss it. I thought maybe I'd miscounted, or maybe the hallway looped. But it didn't. And the worst part, when I asked my cousin Felix, who used to come here every summer as a kid, he froze up and said, "That room doesn't open anymore." Anymore? I asked. He looked down at his hands like they'd betrayed him. I mean, it never did. Helpful. That night, I explored. There's a sort of expectation in inherited houses, like somewhere a secret waits behind a false wall. I didn't find treasure or haunted dolls, but I did find something else. A dusty, warped mirror in the dining room. Giant, gothic, too heavy for modern brackets. I leaned into it and whispered, 13, just to test the theory. And the reflection didn't whisper back. It breathed. For one single second, my reflection fogged over with condensation, like I'd exhaled directly onto the glass. I backed away. It stayed, no drafts, no air vents, and the surface was dry when I touched it, which I shouldn't have done. From the moment I laid a finger on that glass, I've had a metallic taste in my mouth, like pennies soaked in tea. It hasn't gone away. I slept in the 2nd floor room they assigned me. Supposedly, it used to be my great-aunt's. The wallpaper peeled in polite verticals, like it was undressing itself for someone who never came home. I counted the doors again in my head before I drifted off. 12 bedrooms, 13 doors. I know what you're thinking. Maybe one's a closet. Maybe one got sealed off. Old houses do that. But it's not that kind of house. The next morning, I found a small wooden counter near the staircase, like a library checkout desk. On top, an antique abacus. I swear to you, when I walked past it the first time, the beads were all on the left. When I came back from brushing my teeth, one bead was moved to the right. I checked the hallway, no one. So I slid it back, thought maybe I was imagining things. An hour later, 2 beads. It's like the house is keeping track of me. I finally decided to knock on that 13th door. Just one rap, light as possible, like maybe it wouldn't notice. And from inside, I swear, I heard a shuffle, not a full step. Just the drag of fabric across a wooden floor. I've never backed on anything so fast in my life. Tripped over my own heel, hit my elbow, knocked down an old vase that smelled like smoked thyme and damp linen. My phone hasn't worked since. No signal, just a single line of text that appeared in my notes app. We are always 13, one must leave. Weird, right? Could be a glitch. Could be my sleep-deprived brain. Or maybe my cousin Felix playing some elaborate joke. But he's in another state. I called out to the hallway. Okay, very funny. Something knocked back. Once. That's when I knew this wasn't going to be a relaxing weekend. So now I've got my bags packed, a mug of black tea, no sugar, no milk, and I'm sitting on the floor of the second bedroom, trying to make sense of a house that lies about how many rooms it has. There's dust in my hair. There's something crawling behind the walls. And somewhere behind that 13th door, someone's counting. Backwards. If you've ever spent time in an old family house, you'll know. It's not the creaks or cold spots that get to you. It's the photos. Because they never move. They never blink. But sometimes, somehow, they change. After last night's knock-knock, who's there, oh no incident, I figured it was time to dig into the WEXLER archives. Every grand family has some kind of memory room, and this one was no exception. We called it the gold room, not because it had gold, but because it had yellow carpet that had gone stiff from decades of secrets. The gold room had floor-to-ceiling photo albums, loose film reels, boxes of labeled Super 8s, and one ancient family tree etched in silver ink on a wooden slab. And that's when I saw her, Aunt Olive. She was in nearly every group photo from the 1970s, except she was always turned away. Sometimes it was the back of her head, sometimes a shoulder. In one particularly cheerful Easter photo, the whole family is sitting on the steps smiling, and there's Olive in the background, standing in the doorway, eyes closed. But here's the thing. I remember her face. I've never met her, but I know it. I know the shape of her chin, the mole above her eyebrow, the single gray curl that rested on her cheek. I know what she looked like, but no photo shows it. I asked Aunt Rita about it, gently, like one does when you suspect you're about to touch a family nerve. Was Olive camera shy? I joked. Rita paused mid-sip of her peach brandy, 10 a.m., by the way, legend, and said, Olive was temporary. What does that even mean? I pressed her, but she got distracted trying to explain the family numbering system. According to her, each generation of Wexlers had a different pattern for naming kids. Firstborns were always biblical names. Secondborns got celestial names. Thirdborns didn't always get names. I said, wait, what? She smiled like a tired librarian. Well, you can't name what doesn't stay. Unsettling, sure, but not as unsettling as what I found next. Back in the gold room, behind a cracked glass frame of a family picnic from 1983, I discovered a folded letter. It wasn't dated, but the paper was soft like it had aged in a church hymnal. Written in delicate slanted script was the following. To whom it may concern, do not speak of the unnamed. We remember through silence. She does not like recognition. Eyes are the gateway and hers are always closed. Keep them closed. No signature, no explanation, just a warning. I flipped through more albums, determined to find proof. In each decade, there she was, always there, always turned. In one series of Christmas photos, I caught a blurry profile. It was her. Same woman, same dress, even, decades apart. She never aged. That's when I noticed something worse. In some photos, Olive was marked with an X. Someone had gone through and scratched her out over and over again, like they were afraid she'd crawl back out of the negatives. I checked the silver family tree for her name. Nothing. It skipped from Judith 1952 to Elena 1957. No Olive. So of course, I did what any rational, thoroughly unbothered person would do. I Googled her. Or tried to. The Wi-Fi gave me 5 seconds of mercy, just long enough to open a cached page from some amateur genealogy site. I typed Olive WEXLER. One result. It was a post on a message board from 2003. Open quote, username, Dweller13, subject, help with family disappearance. My aunt disappeared during a church service in 1980. She just never came home. No police report was ever filed. My family won't talk about it. Her name was Olive. She was one of them. You know, the thirdborns, close quote. Then the page crashed. Thirdborns again. Why always the third? I went back to the tree, double-checked birth order, and noticed the same thing. In every generation, the thirdborn is either missing, unnamed, or marked with a small spiral symbol, a tight swirl, almost like a fingerprint. Now look, I know what this sounds like. Ooh, creepy family, ooh, mystery missing aunt. But I promise you, This isn't your average American Gothic ghost story. Something lives in the gaps between the records, like it was built that way, like the erasures were part of the plan. That night, I tried to sleep. I really did. I really did. But the hallway light kept flickering every 13 minutes. I timed it, not 12, not 15, 13. And every time it went dark, I swear the air changed, went heavy, sweet, like church incense and mold. Around 2 a.m., the record player in the den came on. Now, we don't have any vinyl in this house. None. But it played anyway. A scratchy recording of a woman's voice humming what I can only describe as a lullaby with teeth, not words, just melody. I crept down the stairs, phone flashlight trembling like a scared chihuahua, and there she was, in the mirror again. But not me. Olive. Eyes closed. But this time her hand was pressed flat against the glass. When I stepped closer, I noticed something scratched into the mirror frame. She comes if you name her, so don't. Let's just say I didn't sleep after that. I stayed in the bathtub with the lights on and my earbuds blasting whale sounds until sunrise. Here's the part that stings most. I believe she was real. I believe Olive was someone, and the family erased her, not out of hatred but fear, like she was the beginning of a pattern, a condition, one they couldn't explain with medicine, so they folded it into faith. That's where the academic debate comes in. There's a whole subfield of anthropological psychiatry that looks at how spiritual systems absorb mental illness. Whether schizophrenia gets labeled prophecy or dissociative episodes get explained as possession. Could this be something like that, or was she something else? I don't have answers yet, but I know this. Tomorrow I'm finding room 13 again, and I'm bringing a mirror. You ever notice how every old family has one illness they keep in a locked drawer? Like they all agreed not to talk about it, but everyone knows what it is. For some, it's nerves. For others, the melancholy. And in the WEXLER's case, it's the fever. That's what they call it. No scientific name, no dates or details, just the fever. Like it's a guest that shows up now and then, sweats a little, sings in your sleep, and leaves the bed cold behind it. I woke up this morning with a fever of 101.3 degrees Celsius. I never get sick. Ever. But my skin felt like it was borrowed from a lizard, and my brain was lagging like a dial-up modem. My lips tasted metallic again, stronger now, like I'd been chewing batteries. I stumbled downstairs, and before I could ask for help, Cousin Darcy handed me a mug. Chamomile and thyme. Drink all of it, she said, which felt a little too ready, you know. The tea was bitter, cloudy, left a thick line on the inside of the ceramic, not herbal tea behavior. I asked what was in it. Darcy smiled in that WEXLER way, tight and crooked. It's family recipe. We all get the fever sometimes. Then she patted my shoulder and said, "Some get it first." Excuse me, first? I took the mug with me to the library and opened every old medical log I could find. Turns out the WEXLERs kept records, very detailed ones. Pages and pages of family illness logs dating back to 1871. Guess what showed up over and over? Third born, fever onset, 2 nights. That's it. Not child caught the flu. Not diagnosed with anything. Just that formula like it was a recipe. The name changes, the century changes, but the pattern holds. Every third-born gets the fever, and most entries end abruptly. No death record, no recovery note, just a line break and a blank space. I started sweating again. I don't know if it was the fever or the implications, or maybe the tea was spiked with nostalgia and regret, but I started remembering things that didn't feel like mine. I remembered sitting in a church pew, eyes rolled back, a man whispering numbers in my ear. I remembered drinking water that tasted like ash. I remembered singing in a language I don't speak. Latin, maybe? I couldn't tell if it was fever dreams or memories passed down like heirlooms. So I went back to Darcy and asked her, point blank, how many in our family had the fever? She looked at me like I'd just said something dirty. "We don't count those," she whispered. "That's how they come back." Then she said it again, quieter like a mantra. "Don't count them. Don't count them. Don't count them." Right. Cool. I walked out the back of the house to clear my head and noticed a rusted water pump and an old stone well. The wind changed as I approached it, warm air humming, not breezing, humming. I leaned over and whispered, "Olive?" I don't know why I said it, just felt like the right thing. No echo, but something moved at the bottom. Something shifted with a wet, sucking sound. I dropped a rock down. No splash. I dropped another. Still nothing. The third one didn't fall at all. It just vanished, like it got caught. And then, out of nowhere, I remembered a story from when I was 6. My mother told me that if you ever felt sick for no reason, and your dreams tasted like old pennies, and your hands started to smell like old book pages, then it wasn't your sickness. It was someone else's coming back through you. Cool bedtime stories, Mom. Back inside, I checked the guest logs. Every visitor over the last century signed in with dates. I found a few patterns. Most WEXLER visitors came alone. Most visitors stayed 3 nights. A large percentage were third children in their family. And one odd detail. Every 20 years, there's an entry simply marked "Carrier arrived." No name. Just that. Then I found the entry for this year. Carrier arrived, room 7, July 27th. That's today. That's my room. That's me. So, who's being carried? You ever look at yourself in the mirror while you're sweating through a fever and think, I might not be the only one in here? Because that's where I'm at now. Oh, and here's a cherry on top. I found an old box labeled WEXLER First Aid under the stairs. It contained iodine, cotton gauze, and a leather-bound notebook filled with symbols and equations. No bandages, no meds. But the last page had this note, open quote, "She got the fever first. We followed. When the sweat stopped, the eyes opened, and they weren't hers anymore." Close quote. So, yeah, normal family stuff. I decided to test my fever dreams. Sat on the floor with a thermometer in one hand and a tape recorder in the other. I asked one question, "Who are you?" And then I closed my eyes. 30 minutes later, I played back the tape. There was my breathing, a shuffle, the faint sound of something wet sliding against the floor, and a voice, not mine, whispering, "Third to arrive, first to burn." I don't know what that means, yet. But I've stopped drinking the tea. And tomorrow I'm breaking into the basement, because communion happens on Thursdays, and something tells me they're not serving crackers and grape juice. Thursdays feel wrong here, like the house tightens its skin. You know how some days feel round and others feel square? Thursdays at the WEXLER compound feel triangular, like every corner is sharper and something's waiting behind each one. When I woke up, the hall smelled like wet bread and mothballs. It wasn't just the mildew or old wood, it was yeast, thick and warm, like someone had been baking in a room no one uses. I followed the smell straight to the basement door, which, up to this point, had been locked with a padlock big enough to stop an angry goat. But today, unlocked. Thursday. The hinges moaned like they hadn't moved in decades. I grabbed my flashlight, took a breath, and went down. Here's the thing about basements. They're never just storage, especially in old religious homes. They're function, either root cellars or punishment rooms. The WEXLERs, they split the difference. The stairs ended at a stone floor slick with condensation. The walls were lined with shelves of empty mason jars, bundles of dried rosemary, and an entire altar. Carved from dark oak, shaped like a table and a pulpit, had a spooky baby. In the center, a silver bowl full of something dark. Grape juice? I hoped. I didn't taste it. There were chairs arranged in a half circle, 13 of them, of course, and a dusty book open on a lectern. I glanced at the pages. Not English. Not Latin. Not anything I recognized. Every symbol had a rhythm to it, like music if it were carved instead of heard. Above it all, a painting nailed to the stone. A woman with eyes closed, mouth open. Olive. Still unnamed. I took a picture of the room on my phone, or tried to. Screen stayed black, and when I got back upstairs, the photo was of my face. Sleeping. Cool. Real cool. Later, I asked Cousin Byron about the basement. He flinched like I'd slapped him. "That's the prayer cellar," he said. "They did the listening down there." "Listening to what?" He didn't answer, just muttered, "We don't ask. Asking's how they get through." "They?" I pushed. What was communion like? Byron finally looked me in the eyes. It wasn't food, it was hours. We sat in silence, and we waited for her to speak through one of us. My stomach turned. Her? He nodded. The unnamed. Let me recap. My family held prayer sessions in a stone basement with 13 chairs and a blood-looking bowl and waited to be possessed. I needed to understand this unnamed thing. I rifled through the house back to the gold room and found an old cassette player with a single tape labeled July 13, 1977, 3:06 a.m. Pressed play. Nothing. Fast-forwarded. Static. Breathing. Then, a voice. Low and heavy, but not entirely human. She walks 13 steps, one for each mistake. The door opens only when all eyes are closed. I hit stop. 13 steps, mistakes, eyes closed. And right then, I realized something. Room 7, the room I'd been assigned. There were 13 floorboards between the bed and the door. I counted. Twice. Each one squeaked differently. A note, almost. A scale. Suddenly the phrase from the mirror came back to me. She comes if you name her. So don't. But we don't need names, not when music will do. That night, I waited. At 3:06 a.m., just like the tape said, I heard something. 13 footsteps. Not heavy, not soft, just certain, like someone who knew the house better than it knew itself. I didn't move, just pulled the covers over my head like I was 10 again and scared of closet monsters. Except closet monsters don't hum lullabies and keys humans don't use. The steps stopped outside my door. I held my breath. No knock, no whisper, just breathing, right against the wood. I wanted to scream. Instead, I whispered the first word that came to mind, olive. And the breathing stopped. Not faded. Stopped. And in its place, laughter. High-pitched, childlike, on repeat like a broken toy. When I opened the door, the hallway was empty, except for a communion wafer on the floor. Still warm. I held it in my palm. The back had writing, burned in like a brand. You're listening now. I flushed it down the sink. Could be mold, could be mass hallucination from fever. But here's the thing, my fever's gone now. Gone completely. And I didn't take anything. So medically speaking, that shouldn't happen. Not like that. But I feel fine. Better than fine. Like I'm the healthiest I've ever been. Which honestly scares me more. Here's what I think is going on. This isn't a haunting. It's not even possession, at least not in the traditional sense. This is tradition. The WEXLERs built this like a ritual machine, an inheritance of disappearance. And Thursdays? Thursdays are tune-ups, academic debate time. There are fringe religious groups, past and present, that believe in the concept of generational vessels, bodies offered up not just for spirits, but for ancestral consciousness. A kind of blood memory roulette. Sometimes voluntary, sometimes not. What if Olive wasn't the first? What if she was the result? I'm going back to the basement tomorrow, and I'm bringing an extra chair. You know what they say about curiosity in cats, but I've never seen a cat get buried alive. I spent most of the morning pretending I wasn't shaking. On the surface, everything was normal. The house smelled like lemon polish. Someone was making biscuits. Cousin Darcy was whistling that tune again, the same one I heard during the communion hour. Something sweet, like a lullaby that forgot how to end. But underneath that, I could feel it. The 13th room wanted me back. Instead, I went to the church archives in the East Wing. Yes, the WEXLER house has a wing, because of course it does. The walls in there are made of faded hymnals and pride, lots of pride. Pictures of WEXLERs giving sermons, running food banks, hosting baptisms, a very we're so holy it hurts vibe. Then I found the ledger. It was buried in a box marked routine maintenance, and which is the creepiest possible place to hide something you don't want found. Inside were yellowed notes typed on brittle paper with titles like Basement Humidity Report, 1948, Furnace Clearance, Ash Disposal Records, Exhumation Protocol, WEXLER NURB 6, that last one, typed but with handwritten notes in the margins. Open quote, subject unearthed at 2:13 a.m. Signs of resistance noted, claw marks inside lid, eyes open. Close quote, let me just say, no thank you. The record continued, open quote, Clergy advised reinterment without communion. Subject deemed unsanctioned return. Marked stone placed instead. Close quote, marked stone. I remember the backfield behind the house, a gentle slope with 13 stone markers arranged in a rough spiral. No names, no dates, just worn, flat faces turned toward the woods. When I asked about it as a kid, someone said it was where the memories rest. Now I'm thinking, they weren't stones to mark the dead, they were to trap them. I went to the field right after lunch, brought a hand spade and my spine, which was doing its best to escape my body. Started with the 6th stone, the one near the birch tree that always looked like it was leaning away from the others. I dug for maybe an hour. My palms blistered. My breath steamed, even though it was 90 degrees. Then, metal. A small brass plaque, polished despite the dirt. It had 2 words etched in "She breathed." That's it. No name, not even Olive. Just "She breathed." I didn't dig further. I couldn't. Something told me the rest wasn't for digging. But I sat there, sweating and covered in soil, thinking, they buried someone alive. Not in the criminal way, not in the horror movie way, in the ritual way, which might be worse, because it means someone planned it. Someone decided it was part of the process. Later, I confronted Byron again. He looked tired, like someone who'd lived 3 lifetimes and never got to pick any of them. I read the exhumation log, I told him. WEXLER number 6, claw marks, eyes open. He didn't flinch, just sighed and said, "She woke up too early. That's not supposed to happen." Who was she? He looked past me toward the 13th room. Not Olive. Before Olive. The girl before her. She had a name. He shook his head. We don't give names to doors. Excuse me, now I was leaning in. What does that mean? Byron stood, walked to the old family tree, and pointed to the blank line between 2 siblings in 1935. That's her. My grandmother's sister. She got the fever too. And then she started copying everyone. Their walk, their voice, their handwriting. She mirrored them, he nodded, until she was all of them, and none of herself. Goosebumps, by the way. Literal ones, like my skin was trying to get away from the story. They buried her when she started writing in her sleep. Not words, just numbers, 1 through 13, over and over in a spiral. And of course, I'd seen that spiral before, in the family photos, on the birth charts, on the communion bowl in the basement. Same exact pattern. You think she's still down there? I asked. Byron laughed, not like a joke, like someone remembering something painful they're not allowed to forget. She left the body, he said, but not the house. Now we're getting into territory I'm not equipped for. So I called an old friend, someone who used to study abandoned cult compounds before moving into disaster management. I gave him the details, minus the ghosts. Just the layout, the strange logs, the buried markers. He paused and said, "You've got a containment design." What does that mean? It means your house isn't a house. It's a ritual device, a machine made to hold something in. Like a prison? More like a vault, or a lighthouse, or a lock. And here's the thing that really messed with me. He asked if I'd noticed any consistent primes. What? Prime numbers. 13 steps, 13 doors, every 3rd child. That's all prime alignment. Apparently, in some fringe engineering systems, prime number sequences are believed to weaken linear dimensional structures. Whatever that means. In simpler words, they make the veil thinner. So now I'm thinking, every 3rd-born child is like a pin in the lock. A necessary part of the combination, not broken, just sacrificed for access. And if they buried the 6th one alive, maybe it wasn't to stop her. Maybe it was to complete the set. Let's take a moment to acknowledge the academic debate. Is it possible that inherited schizophrenia or dissociative conditions have been misinterpreted by spiritualist groups as possession? Absolutely. But then you have to ask, what happens when the behavior spreads, like a virus, or a pattern, or a song? Because last night I heard someone humming under the floorboards, the same lullaby, again and again and again. Tomorrow I'm going back to the 13th door, and this time I'm going to knock twice. So I made a decision that, in hindsight, probably deserves a forehead slap. I moved my things into room 7. You know, the one everyone avoids? The one where the walls hum and the air smells like hot iron filings and half-forgotten dreams? Yeah, that one. I told myself I was just being logical, that if the 13th door is going to do something, I'd rather be nearby. Maybe I'd catch something. Record sounds, take notes, measure tremors, whatever. Big brave science brain. Real cool. Right up until 3-6 a.m. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start with what happened when I first stepped in. The room didn't feel like the others. It was warm, almost muggy. Not temperature warm, but like it had its own breath, like it had exhaled just before I walked in and now it was waiting to see what I'd do. The floorboards groaned when I set down my bag, but not under my feet. Beside them, as if the room was reacting just a half second later than it should have. The wallpaper was faded blue with tiny birds. But when I looked closer, the birds weren't flying, they were falling. Wings tucked, noses pointed down, every single one. I checked the walls. Standard layout. Except the closet door was nailed shut, like with actual nails, not just painted over, like someone had sealed it during an exorcism or a very bad fashion crisis. I didn't open it. Not yet. At 9 p.m., I started hearing the hum. Soft at first, like an electric toothbrush in another room. Low and rhythmic. But it grew. Got into my teeth. Settled in the base of my spine like a tuning fork that forgot the note it was supposed to play. I laid down, kept the lights off, just one candle on the desk. That's when I noticed something strange on the nightstand. An old Polaroid curled at the edges, probably from the 80s. It showed a girl sitting on the edge of the bed. This bed. Head turned away, of course. Always turned. The only detail clear was her hands. Pale. Long fingers. 13 rings. On the back of the photo, written in childlike block letters, only one sleeps at a time. I flipped the photo back over. The candle went out and the bed began to vibrate. Not like shaking from a truck outside or mild tectonic panic. No, this was mechanical, controlled, a pulse that ran from the bed frame into my spine, like someone flipping a switch every second. Then the walls joined in. The hum became a full-blown note, like an organ playing from inside the drywall. My ears popped. I could hear beneath the noise like whispers under the frequency. No language, just the shape of meaning. Heavy. Round. I tried to get up, but I couldn't. Not sleep paralysis. I've had that before. This was different. My muscles worked. I could move. But the air held me down, like gravity had decided I was part of the floor now. I whispered, "Olive." That usually breaks the weirdness. But this time, something answered. It wasn't a word, just a sound, a breath from under the bed. It smelled like soil and rust, and then something touched my ankle. No pressure, just presence. That broke the spell. I launched myself off the bed and crashed to the floor, rolled straight under the desk and knocked over a stack of dusty hymnals, which fell with a very unholy bang. Silence, total silence. My nose bled, just a drip. But the blood wasn't red, it was black, like ink. I stood up, unsteady, vision swimming like a broken VHS tape. And the first thing I saw was the closet, still nailed shut, still quiet, and the whisper, "Only one sleeps at a time." You know what that means, right? If I fell asleep in that bed, something else would have to wake up. Academic sidebar. There's a theory in cognitive folklore that some rituals are transactional consciousness events. Essentially, old spiritual systems that treated memory as currency. One person sleeps, one remembers, one hosts. The idea being there is never an empty space in the mind. Something always fills the silence. What if room 7 is a relay station, a place where one person dreams while another takes their place? And maybe that's why no one uses this room, because once someone woke up in it and never left. Later that night, after I relocated my shaking, traumatized body to the hallway, I slept in the linen closet, no shame. I snuck back in with a magnet. I held it up to the closet door. The nails were brass, not steel, non-magnetic, which means they were hammered in for symbolic reasons, not security. I pulled out the small crowbar I found earlier, don't ask where, I collect objects now, it's a trauma response, and gently started prying the boards loose. One nail popped. 2. And then I heard a single knock. From inside the closet, I froze, nail halfway out, then another knock, and then a whisper, right next to my ear. "Why aren't you sleeping?" I dropped the crowbar, ran, locked the hallway bathroom, and sat in the tub for 3 hours with the curtain drawn like that would stop whatever sleeps sideways in my family tree. When I finally dozed off, I dreamed of a line of children holding hands, walking into the 13th door. Each had their eyes closed, except the last one. That one had my face. Tomorrow I'm calling the oldest WEXLER still alive. Alive. Great Uncle Norman. The one who doesn't talk anymore, because apparently he used to live in room 7. I drove into town the next morning with a splitting headache and 2 cotton balls jammed in my ears like some makeshift curse plug. Still ringing, still humming. Room 7 had done something to my brain, like a tuning fork had been left vibrating in there overnight, or like I had absorbed a language I wasn't supposed to hear. Small towns are great for one thing. Secrets never stay secret if you ask the right person. And usually, that person is someone who's been paid to keep other people alive. Pharmacists, dentists, nurses, funeral home interns. They see everything, and if you catch them in the right season of retirement, they'll tell you exactly how weird your family is. His name was Mr. Reed. Ivory coat, thick glasses, a chin like an overbaked scone. He looked like he'd been 80 for at least 20 years. The first thing he said to me was, "Wexler?" Just like that. No hello, no how can I help you? "Just my last name." I nodded. He frowned. "You shouldn't be here." So I bought a tube of toothpaste and a pack of gum, real subtle. Then I followed up with, "Did you used to fill prescriptions for my family?" Reed looked at the gum, then at me. "Which generation?" Creepy question, right? "Let's say Olives," I offered, "and Normans." He leaned back on the stool, sighed, and said, "Oh, those Wexlers." Turns out the Wexlers had their own private medication plan, not through insurance, no paper trail, and they weren't getting your run-of-the-mill vitamins and antibiotics either. They were ordering heavy-duty mood stabilizers, lithium carbonate, olanzapine, haloperidol, risperidone, enough to dose a full psych ward. I asked the obvious, was someone schizophrenic? Reed shook his head immediately. No, not that. Your family wasn't crazy. Well, not in the usual way. He rummaged through a box under the counter and came up with an old delivery log. Half the pages were stained with whatever nightmares pharmacists spill on paper. But one detail stuck out. Every order was coded by number, not by name, by birth order, like WEXLER 3B, WEXLER 6A, WEXLER 9C, 3 doses every 3rd birth, and those matched the children I couldn't account for in the photo albums. So I asked him, what were the meds for? And he said, very calmly, like it was a math problem, to contain something. I blinked. Contain? He nodded. You dose the ones who hear it the strongest, the ones who hum at night, the ones who have the dreams before they lose language. He paused and looked me dead in the eye, and you never let them sleep in the 13th room. There it was again, the hum. The 13th room. The pattern. I tried to laugh, lighten the moment, keep it PG. So what, my family ran a traveling horror show and you were the backstage manager? He didn't laugh. Your family, he said slowly, was part of an experiment. Academic intermission. In certain regions of post-war Europe, religious communes conducted non-consensual medical trials on isolated families, many under the cover of faith healing. It's debated whether these were coordinated or just overlapping in practice, but the idea was to breed out spiritual resistance to voices, hallucinations, or what some called the call beyond. Some researchers suggest this was actually a neurological filtering test. Find the bloodlines where auditory processing blurs the natural and supernatural. Reed never confirmed it, but he sure hinted that my family was in the middle of one of those experiments. And the medicine? I asked. It worked, he said. For a while, but the moment you stop taking it, the dreams return. Then the muttering. Then the static. And after that, he looked out the window. They walk into the 13th room. I wanted to laugh again, but I couldn't. Not really. Okay? Because I hadn't told him anything. Not about the closet, not about the photo, not even about the hum, but he knew. As I got up to leave, he added something that haunts me still. Your Aunt Olive came to me once. She had scratch marks on her arms, not fresh, healed, hundreds of them, in patterns. Did you ask what happened? He nodded. She said they were from when she lived backwards for a week. I blinked. What does that mean? She never explained. Oh, and get this. He hands me a little paper bag, no label, just 3 white pills sealed with a twist tie. Take one if the dream starts speaking in rhyme. I asked what it was. He said, not FDA approved. I left the store with shaking hands. You ever walk into a building and realize the paint on the walls is hiding something you're not ready to see? That was my whole bloodline. I went back to the estate and made a list of every third-born WEXLER over the past century, and I found something horrifying. None of them lived past 20. Except one, my great-uncle Norman, the one who stopped talking, the one I planned to visit next, the only third-born still alive. I called the nursing home. They said he doesn't respond to visitors, doesn't speak, doesn't blink, just constantly. There's something about numbers that feels safer than feelings. That's probably why I spent the entire night in the study, surrounded by crumbling family records and a notepad, trying to piece together the WEXLER genealogy like it was a high-stakes Sudoku puzzle. The WEXLERs were prolific breeders. My great-grandparents had 8 kids. Their kids had anywhere from 2 to 5. Each generation had grown up inside the same estate or within walking distance of it. There were more than 40 direct descendants since 1890. I started assigning numbers, not names, just birth order and generation. Every time I found a third-born, I circled them in red. Some of the names I recognized: Olive's brother Henry, cousin Lynette, and a girl named Ruth who disappeared in 1976 and was last seen at the creek. But the creepiest part wasn't that I couldn't find their death records. It was that, for nearly all of them, there were no high school records either. It was as if, after age 13 or 14, they just stopped participating in public life. Some weren't even registered with the county past a certain year. No taxes, no marriages, no mortgages. Just poof. Gone. One third-born WEXLER was said to have joined the Navy, but when I called the Archive Center in Annapolis, they had no record of him, just a half-filled application and a fingerprint card with a note, rejected, irregularities in patterning. That phrase didn't sit right. What pattern? I reached back out to Mr. Reed and asked about it. He responded with a 2-word email. Dermatoglyphics mismatch. Great. I was officially being haunted by medical lingo. I fell asleep at the desk again, and again the dreams came. This time I wasn't in the 13th room. I was under it, like in a basement or something beneath a basement. It smelled of copper and mildew. Something warm slithered around my ankles, but I couldn't move. I heard 13 voices humming, each at a different pitch, and behind that, something like breathing. Then one word from nowhere and everywhere at once: return. I woke up in the bathtub. Don't ask me how I got there. Academic pause. There's a long-standing folk belief in some parts of Appalachia and Eastern Europe that certain birth positions in a family carry spiritual weight, particularly the third-born, who were believed to inherit ancestral influence or be spiritually vulnerable to echoing. It's not universally accepted, but there's enough anecdotal overlap to give researchers goosebumps. Back to the family tree. I was now convinced the third-borns were the key to the disappearances, and I had something even worse to consider. I was the third-born in my generation. I know, right? Should have checked earlier. But I was an afterthought baby, 12 years behind my sisters, and I never thought of myself in that lineup. That's when I made a decision, both rational and absolutely unhinged. I'd drive 3 hours to see the last living third-born WEXLER, Uncle Norman. He was in a state-run facility that looked more like a neglected middle school than a medical center. The walls were that chalky institutional green. The receptionist barely blinked when I signed in. I think my last name still opened doors. They took me down a hallway to a locked wing labeled Memory and Echo Care. Not Memory Care. Memory and Echo. I asked about it, and the nurse just shrugged. Facility joke, she said. Sort of. Norman was sitting upright, dressed in crisp white pajamas. He didn't move when I walked in. His eyes were fixed on something above and to the left of my head. Not the ceiling, just past it. I sat, I waited, and then I heard it. He was humming. Not like Ladida, not a tune, more like a low, sustained frequency. A human did not make that sound. It vibrated in the floor, in the walls, in my teeth. And then he said it, clear as a bell, "You're next." I shot up so fast the chair fell over. The nurse outside looked at me calmly and said, "He doesn't talk." I said, "He just did." She smiled politely, the way someone smiles when they've heard every version of grief before. "He hasn't spoken in 27 years at night." I went back to the house and locked myself in the attic. I didn't want to be near room 7 or the 13th door. I reread Notebook, tried to breathe, tried to laugh it off. I mean, come on, maybe this was all a long, dark prank from a family so repressed they turned into walking horror novels. Maybe the house had a carbon monoxide leak. Maybe I just needed a salad. But every time I closed my eyes, I heard that word again. Return. Joke's on me. Even in my dreams, I couldn't leave the house anymore. I started sleeping with the hallway light on. You know, the one that always flickers 13 times before it stays lit. I don't know what kind of person stumbles on a sealed court transcript in their great-uncle's crawl space, but apparently I'm that person now. It happened like this. I couldn't sleep, and I remembered something Norman had said. "You're next." That was bothering me. Not just because it sounded like a threat from a psychic clown, but because it meant he knew something about a sequence. And when I get obsessed with something, I go digging. Literally. Behind the water heater in the crawl space was a rusted storage bin marked only with the initials WSP. WEXLER Spiritual Proceedings? WEXLER Secret Papers? I don't know. But inside were files tied with rotting twine and sealed with a wax stamp I had only ever seen on one of the family Bibles. On top, a folder labeled State vs. WEXLER, 1952, sealed. My brain did that soft click thing where everything suddenly makes horrible sense. I opened it slowly, like it might hiss. The paper smelled like mold and pipe tobacco. There were court sketches, shaky pencil lines of faces that were blurred or scribbled transcripts typed on brittle, yellowing pages. The judge's name, Eli Murnane. The stenographer's name, Doris F. Clyburn. I Googled both of them. Nothing. No obituaries, no retirement announcements, no family trees, just nothing. 2 professionals disappeared from public record after that case, like they got erased for attending the wrong sermon. The transcripts were fragmented. Whole pages were missing. But what remained sent goosebumps crawling up my spine like ticks. Open quote, accused of harboring 13 individuals below the property in defiance of state health codes, close quote. Open quote, identities of said individuals remain unconfirmed, as none appear in existing census documentation, close quote. Open quote, the 3rd child is offered not in harm but in pattern to complete the cycle, close quote. Then this gem, scrawled in the margin in pencil, open quote, no graves, no bones, just clothes and teeth, close quote. I'm going to go ahead and say that's not something you ever want to read before bed. But here's what really twisted the knife. One final entry from the court clerk, apparently added weeks after the trial ended. Open quote, court adjourned without verdict. Judge and stenographer never returned. Proceedings never published. All further inquiry prohibited by governor's office. Close quote. Huh. You ever have one of those moments where your stomach drops and you're like, oh no, I'm in a different story than I thought I was in? Yeah. The WEXLER compound wasn't just a creepy house full of secrets. It had been under investigation for human concealment and religious malpractice, and somehow the law gave up, walked away, like they knew better. At this point, it would be smart to pack your bags and leave. I tried. I swear I did. I locked the 13th room. I left a note for the lawyer. I even drove halfway to Pittsburgh, but I kept hearing something in the car radio, even when it was off. A single word looping quietly under the static: return. Joke number 1. What do you call a GPS that gaslights you into returning to a haunted estate? A WEXLER. The worst part? I did return. It was like the wheel turned on its own. I blinked and I was pulling back into the gravel drive, the porch light flickering like it had been waiting. That night, I told myself I'd just sleep once, then figure it out. I lay in bed, not room 7, thank you very much, and opened the folder again. There was a sketch of one of the unidentified 13. Just a child, maybe 8 years old, with wide-set eyes and a perfectly blank expression. No name, no caption. But on the back, in delicate cursive, open quote, knows all the songs, only hums when the pattern breaks. Close quote. Excuse me? Academic pause. There's a fascinating and debated field called forensic sound theory. It's mostly fringe, but it explores how persistent tonal patterns in confined spaces might affect cognition, memory, and even behavior. Some theorists believe that hum resonance in cult architecture could reinforce compliance or dissociation. Again, not mainstream, but oddly familiar now. Later that night, I heard it again. From the vents, a soft harmonic hum. 13 notes. Always 13. I recorded it, played it back. Nothing. The audio was blank. I laughed, but it was one of those brittle laughs you do when your brain's trying to hold two realities at once. Joke number 2. Why did I start a podcast called How to Get Possessed in 13 Easy Steps? Because apparently I like structured trauma. But the strangest part of that whole day, the thing that keeps bouncing around my skull, in the court file in tiny type at the bottom of the final page, there was one line I can't stop reading. Open quote, witness list, names removed, all third born, close quote, all third born. I shut the file. I closed the trunk. I told myself it was bedtime, and then I saw it. Under the hallway light, now flickering red, the shadow of a child standing just outside the 13th door. He looked like he was waiting for me. He looked like he remembered me. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. He raised a hand, not to wave, to point, straight at me. If you've never heard a 10-year-old recite full Latin hymns in her sleep backwards, you're missing out on a very specific type of lifelong trauma. Her name was Elsie. My cousin's daughter, a quiet kid, sweet enough, a little withdrawn but not creepy. Not until this week, anyway. Before all this, her biggest rebellion was refusing to eat anything green unless it was in gummy bear form. But 3 nights ago, she started sleepwalking. And then she started speaking. We're not talking gibberish either. It was structured, rhythmic. At first, I thought it was a weird TikTok audio she'd memorized or something, but then I recorded it, and Google Translate told me the phrase she kept whispering was, Agnus absens venit tertio, sanguis familiae servabit. The absent lamb arrives third. The blood of the family will preserve. Yeah, that's a big old nope in cursive. When I played the audio for my cousin, her mother, she turned a color I didn't know human skin could turn. That sort of pale gray green that reminds you of mushrooms and basement walls. She said, that's from my grandmother's Bible. It was in a handwritten appendix. Wait, hold up. What? Apparently, some versions of the family Bible had private notes, margins full of codes, Latin passages, strange diagrams, the kind of things you'd expect to see in an exorcist's office, not in a rural family church. I asked to see this Bible. She refused, said she'd burned it after Elsie's last sleep episode. Joke number 1, burning the haunted Bible. Classic move. If movies have taught me anything, it's that fire solves everything, until it doesn't. Elsie's behavior got stranger after that. She started drawing only one image over and over, a circle made of 13 tally marks, enclosing a smaller circle with a single black dot. Sometimes she'd hide them under her mattress. Other times she'd fold them into tiny paper cranes and leave them on the windowsills. I tried asking her about them. She didn't respond. Until one night, around 2 a.m., I woke up to find her standing in the hallway. Still asleep, still chanting. This time she wasn't using Latin. She was counting. 1, 2, gone. 4, 5, gone. She skipped every third number. Then she reached 13, and instead of saying the word, she just stopped, looked straight at me, and smiled. I did what any rational adult would do. I bolted upright, stubbed my toe on the door frame, and spilled an entire glass of lukewarm lemon tea all over myself. Because I'm brave like that. The next morning, I called a linguistics professor from the nearby university, someone who had published on glossolalia and sleep language in children. I didn't tell him it was about my cousin. I just played the recording. He was silent for a moment, then said, "Is this a hoax?" I said no. He replied, "That's ancient church Latin, but heavily modified, almost like someone's reconstructed it. It's not just a chant, it's a cipher." He wouldn't elaborate. Hung up on me. Academic pause. There's still debate in religious and anthropological circles over constructed liturgy in isolated sects, pseudo-Latin or pseudo-Aramaic languages invented to simulate divine language, often passed down orally. They're sometimes described as closed codes, meaning they evolved to encrypt and obscure as part of a ritual defense mechanism. That's exactly what this sounded like. Later that day, I found another of Elsie's drawings. This time, she'd labeled the black dot in the center, me. It wasn't just sleep talking anymore. It was sleep navigating. Joke number 2. If your kid starts marking herself as the center of a ritual diagram, maybe skip soccer practice and call a medievalist. I finally broke into the room where she'd been drawing. Room 11, the old nursery. The air felt electric, like the kind of place where your skin goes cold before your brain catches up. Under the floorboard, I found a folded scrap of hymn paper. It read, "Born third, sings first, returns last." And in the corner, a list of 13 names, all written in different handwriting. Some were crossed out, others circled. Elsie's name was last. I brought it to my cousin. She didn't even read it, just sighed, closed her eyes, and said, "It's happening again." What? 3 generations ago, it started with a girl just like her. They said it was epilepsy, but every third born in this family ends up vanishing, and it always starts with the singing. I asked what happened to the last one. She looked at me with dead, flat eyes. She disappeared in front of her mother's eyes, singing the same hymn, "Room Turned Cold." Her shoes were left behind. I asked what she meant by again. She said, "We thought skipping a generation would stop it. We were wrong." The 13th door had been closed for weeks, but that night I found it open, and Elsie was standing inside, barefoot. She turned, her eyes still closed, and whispered, "It's your turn next. He's listening now." I shut the door, hard, and when I looked again, she wasn't there. Just her drawing, just the circle, with the black dot in the middle. And 13 names spinning around her. Some stories take a minute to get creepy. This one, it arrives already shivering. So here's how I found out. An old locked drawer in the chapel office, rusted from the inside. Behind 2 expired fire extinguishers and a dusty organ, I found a wooden cabinet jammed shut with what looked like braided hair. I know. I didn't touch it with my hands, used a letter opener and the corner of a hoodie I no longer care about. Inside, a manila folder labeled Patient 18, WEXLER F, holding file, 1971 to 1974. This wasn't a medical folder like you'd get at a hospital. No, it had the WEXLER family's seal on it, just like the one engraved above the 13th room. The edges were singed, and inside were 5 fragile pages, hand-typed notes, brittle like onion skin, each one marked confidential ecclesiastic record. I didn't even know that was a category. Let's take a little peek. Subject presented symptoms at 27 weeks, no heartbeat detected, but exterior signs consistent with advanced gestation. Okay, standard enough until the line below. Month 15, fetal position maintained, abdominal expansion consistent with 3rd trimester spiral, internal temperatures lowered, external pulses irregular. Excuse me? Month 15, not week, month. I did the math twice. This woman, patient 18, whose name was redacted in all but one place, spoiler, it was Miriam Wexler, was reportedly pregnant for over 2 years, and they kept her in the chapel basement the whole time. Joke number 1, I've heard of late bloomers, but this is full-on horticultural horror. One report noted that she hummed during the night, always the same melody. When staff asked what it was, she said, "The waiting song." I kept flipping. Midpoint, chanting intensifies. Subject refuses nourishment. States, "He'll come when the circle is ready." I started shaking, not because of what I read, but because I recognized the handwriting on one of the margins. It matched the paper Elsie had drawn on last week. Same curling L's, same tiny backward E's. This wasn't just a one-off case. This was ritual. It gets worse. Final page, delivery failed, no expulsion, subject asleep, belly flat. Wait. What? Next line, no biological remains detected, no hemorrhaging, only trace residual salt ring on bedsheets and mild phosphorescence. Yeah, you read that right. Salt ring, phosphorescence, like something lifted itself out of her, cleaned up, and left behind a glowing souvenir. Academic debate time. There's a controversial theory in both psychiatric and theological circles called psychosomatic parturition, in which the body undergoes full pregnancy symptoms without a fetus. But this didn't follow any known case. No trauma response, no stress disorder, just ritual timing. 3 generations, 13 names, spiral pregnancy, 0 exit wound. I brought the file to the local historical society, and the sweet old man there, bless his heart, took one look and said, "Oh, they tried to burn this stuff after the trial." Trial? "You don't know about the inquest?" he asked. "The WEXLER girl who disappeared mid-delivery, room full of witnesses. Nothing left but a sound like wind and the taste of blood in the air." I asked if the trial records were public. He shook his head. Sealed until 2075. Joke number 2, bureaucracy protects demons better than lawyers ever could. When I asked why he still remembered, he said, "Because my wife was in the room. She never spoke again." Cool, casual, wonderful. I returned to the chapel thinking maybe this was all exaggerated, embellished over time like a local ghost story. But then I noticed something I hadn't before. 13 ceiling beams above the pulpit, all carved with names. 12 of them I recognized from the circle drawings. The 13th had no name, just a carved black dot. Later that night, I heard humming, low and steady, not unpleasant. Kind of like a lullaby. It seemed to come from beneath the chapel floor. And then I noticed the floorboards under the pulpit were newer than the rest. I tapped. Hollow. I pulled up the boards. Below, a cement hatch, with one word scratched into the top. Remember. No handle, just a keyhole in the shape of a circle. I don't have a key, but I do have a feeling about where it might be. Because guess what I found tucked in the very back of patient 18's file? A pressed flower. 13 petals, each labeled with a tiny Roman numeral. The third petal had a bump behind it. I peeled it back and found something metal embedded in the paper. Elsie's drawings had a flower too. I just never saw it until now. She was showing me the key the whole time. Joke number 3. In this family, the birds and bees come with user manuals and blood rituals. I held the metal piece up to the chapel hatch. It clicked. But I didn't open it. Not yet. Because humming from beneath the chapel had stopped. And I swear to you, something hummed back. I don't remember walking back to the house. I don't remember leaving the chapel at all. Just the smell of the wood, warm old pine, and the feeling that something beneath the building was also waiting. Not sleeping, just waiting. I locked the chapel behind me. I hid the key fragment. I didn't sleep. The next morning, Elsie was gone. Her bed was untouched, window sealed. No footprints. Her drawings were still on the walls, but they'd changed. The central dot wasn't black anymore. It was red. Scribbled in with what looked like crayon at first, but crayon doesn't smell like copper. And in the corner of the room, another circle, made of salt. Around the shoes she wore the day before. She hadn't left. She'd been taken. I called my cousin. No answer. I called the sheriff. He came within 20 minutes. He looked through the room, saw the salt, the drawings, the humming marks etched into the headboard, and said nothing for a long time. Then he just muttered, "We've seen this before." I stared at him. "You knew about this?" He nodded. "Not officially, just stories. The 13s don't leave, they fold." "They fold? What does that mean?" I asked, but he just looked at me like he wanted to help, but couldn't or wouldn't. "There's always one left behind," he said, "to remember." I went back to the chapel alone. I don't know what I thought I'd find. Maybe I thought Elsie would be waiting inside, barefoot on the pulpit, humming some lullaby that would make this all some weird misunderstanding. Or that she'd laugh, call it a prank, tell me the salt ring was a Pinterest trend I hadn't heard of. Instead, the hatch was open, only a crack, enough to smell the damp. You ever open a root cellar after decades? That smell of soil and iron mixed with mildew and age? But beneath it all, something else. Lavender. And mildew. Just like the house on St. Elia Ridge. I opened the hatch fully and climbed down. Steps of old stone curved in a perfect spiral. One torch lit, one every 4 steps. How were they burning? Each was shaped like a candle, but the flame was cold, flickering without heat. Below the chapel was a chamber, round, lined with 13 pillars, one for each family name etched with dates that spanned centuries. On the floor, the same circle Elsie had drawn, black dot in the center, and something standing in that dot. Not a person, not Elsie. It was the shape of a girl, yes, but her skin was gray, translucent, like wax stretched over twine. Her hair was the color of cobwebs. She was humming, and when she turned, she had no eyes, just blackness, and in her hands a bundle wrapped in cloth. I whispered, "Elsie." She didn't answer. She just unwrapped the cloth. Inside, the key, the full key, the real one, smooth and bone white, with the 13-petal flower carved at the head. I took a step forward, but the chamber pulsed. The salt ring on the ground flared white, and the humming stopped. She said one word, "Fold," and the torches all went out. I woke up at the base of the chapel stairs. It was morning. The hatch was gone, as if it had never been there. The floor was solid again, dust undisturbed, sunlight pouring through stained glass like everything was normal. But I still had the key, and the drawing was still in my hand. Later, I asked a local archivist what fold meant in religious contexts. She said, "To fold is to hide, to bend the world so something disappears without leaving." The earliest Christians believed miracles were folds, little breaks in the world, the place you go when you vanish. She didn't ask why I was interested, but before I left, she told me something else. "You're not the first to ask. In fact, someone came last year. A girl said she was the last of 13, that she needed to make sure the door stayed closed." I showed her a photo of Elsie. The woman froze. "That's her." But Elsie hadn't come here last year. She'd never left the commune. Unless she had. Unless what I saw under the chapel wasn't her yet. Unless the fold already happened and I was seeing the echo of something still to come. Time doesn't always move forward in places like this. I left the chapel and locked the door behind me. I buried the key in the woods. I tried not to dream. But that night I heard humming again, this time from inside the walls. I woke up to find my own handwriting on the mirror. Not a message, just a number. 13 scrawled with the leftover soap from the bathroom sink. I hadn't written it. I don't sleepwalk. I checked the door locks, still latched. I checked the windows, sealed. I even checked the crawl space, flashlight in hand. No entry, no footprints, just the mark. And then, while brushing my teeth, I remembered something from my childhood. When I was 8, I went to the WEXLER family reunion. I barely recall it, just a blur of picnic tables, corn on the cob, and weird-smelling ants. But I do remember the shirt they gave me. A plain red shirt with everyone's names printed in white, like a school event. Except mine wasn't on it. In fact, mine was scribbled on the back tag, in ballpoint pen, like an afterthought. I remember crying about it and someone saying, "It's not your year yet." Back then, I assumed it meant birthday rotation or something. But now, I think I was the 13th. And this year it's my turn. The doctrine was stored in a locked trunk in the attic, under old quilt boxes and new newspaper clippings that smelled like smoke. I didn't recognize the trunk at first because it had no markings, just a dial lock, 13 digits. I didn't know the code, but I didn't need to. The moment I touched it, the lock clicked open. Inside was a leather-bound book, more like a ledger than a journal. It was titled in precise, elegant script, The Doctrine of Vanishing. Underneath, for the remaining one, the pages were filled with formulas, not chemical or mathematical formulas, rituals written like equations. Each had a title like WEXLER number 3, The Third Path to Silence, WEXLER 6, The Weight of Remembering, WEXLER number 13, Absence of Absence, and next to each, diagrams, circles within circles, people placed like coordinates, dots connected with fine thread-like lines. The Wexlers didn't just experience disappearances, they engineered them, as though vanishing was the family profession, as though they'd been perfecting it over generations. The margins were filled with annotations too. One in particular was repeated again and again like a warning. Open quote, "Not all who disappear return. Not all who return are whole." Close quote. One section caught my eye more than the rest. A page dog-eared over and stained with what looked like wax. It was titled, The Doctrine of the Fold, Event 13. It listed a date, tomorrow, a name, mine, and a place, room 13. I flipped forward. There were no more entries, just one final statement written in blood-red ink. Open quote, "The final Wexler must choose, fold the door or walk through." Close quote. I had to know more. So I called Irene, the only surviving Wexler from my grandmother's generation. She lived 3 towns over in a cabin that had satellite TV but no cell service. I drove out there with the doctrine in a backpack. When she saw me, she didn't smile. She just said, "I hoped you wouldn't find it." I laid the book out on her kitchen table. She wouldn't touch it. "That book's been calling since I was a girl," she said. "It got your Uncle Martin, your cousin Reggie, my own sister too." She pointed to a page. "That one's about her." I asked if she knew what the fold meant. She hesitated. "It's like when the world gets tired of holding someone. You don't die, you don't leave, you're just thinned out, pulled behind the wallpaper of reality." She pointed to my name. "That means it's you next. And if you're the 13th, it means the family line resets or ends." I asked what happened if I refused. "If you walk away, the fold finds you anyway, but slower, more painful. You'll lose your voice first, then your reflection. Then people will forget you existed. Even your own face and photos will blur." My hand was already trembling. But then she said something else. "There's a loophole. Every doctrine has one. You just have to remember it's not the vanishing that matters. It's what you take with you." That night, I reread the doctrine over and over. One line began to shimmer under candlelight. Open quote, "To undo the fold, a song must be remembered by more than one." Close quote. A song, the lullaby, the humming, Elsie. I wasn't supposed to forget her. I was supposed to sing her back. There's something very final about hearing your own knock echoed back to you. It's not like a neighbor replying or a friend saying, "Come in." It's you, but not you. Like your own hesitation has returned wearing a mask. The door didn't open. It simply ceased to exist. Like a movie frame being cut from the reel, room 13 folded in on itself. First the hinges, then the knob, then the shape. All gone. In its place, a hallway that shouldn't be there. Longer than the house allowed, wallpaper too clean, carpet not worn, and air not musty but electric like a storm was trapped inside the walls. I stepped through, because by that point, what else was left? Inside, everything was too quiet. Not peaceful quiet, hospital quiet. The kind of quiet where people go when they don't come back the same. The hallway curved slightly, enough to suggest it shouldn't exist within physical space. No doors, no lights, just faint illumination from nowhere. And then I saw her, Elsie, standing at the end, humming. Same dress from the day she vanished, white cotton with blue buttons, barefoot, freckles, no older than the day she left, but her shadow bent sideways. I froze. She didn't smile, she just tilted her head and said, You remembered the song. I nodded. That means we both stay, she said, or we both go. What's in here? I asked. She turned slowly, motioned to the wall, and touched it. The wallpaper dissolved like ash. Behind it, portraits. Of us. Of all 13. But in every picture, one person was always missing. Sometimes it was her. Sometimes it was me. Sometimes it was someone I didn't even recognize, erased like a correction. This place feeds on forgetting, Elsie whispered. But if enough people remember, it collapses. I asked if she wanted to leave. She didn't answer. Instead, she reached into her pocket and pulled out something, a torn piece of the doctrine folded into a perfect triangle. She handed it to me. It's your turn to decide what WEXLERs are now. I turned and walked back. No ceremony, no vanishing, just a hallway unspooling behind me until I stepped back into the real world. The door reassembled behind me. But room 13 was gone for good. The next morning, I burned the doctrine. Not in anger, in relief. No more folds, no more disappearances. Just memory, and its fragile power to keep things in place. That was months ago. Now the house is quiet, empty. The hum has stopped, but sometimes I walk past a mirror and see a girl's reflection beside me. She's always barefoot, and I hum the song, just in case she forgets it again. If you're still here, I want to thank you. You made it through all 15 parts, through the WEXLER doctrine, the rooms that changed shape, the echoes of memory, and that long, curling hallway that wasn't supposed to exist. That's no small thing. Not everyone makes it to the end of stories like this. So before we let go of the last thread together, let's just sit with it for a moment. How memory can stitch things together, and how forgetting, when left unchecked, can quietly unravel the people we love most. That's what this was always about. Not religion, not medicine, not doctrine, but the fragile scaffolding of family and how easily it collapses when someone disappears. Elsie was never truly gone. Not entirely. Not as long as the song survived in someone's head. And maybe that's the strange grace of stories like this. The idea that what we remember is sometimes stronger than what we know for sure. So as you turn off the lights tonight and your room settles into quiet, maybe you'll think of a door that shouldn't exist, or a shadow that doesn't match its body, or maybe you'll just feel a little more grateful for the names you haven't forgotten yet. That's all this story ever wanted, to be remembered. Now, get some rest. The doctrine is over, and no one has to go missing tonight. Open quote, open quote, open end of script. Good night. Close quote, close quote, close quote.